Despite their sad connotations, cemeteries are often peaceful, pretty places. They offer people a chance to mourn and remember loved ones and are often set amongst beautiful greenery. Cemeteries are places that can have polar opposite atmospheres, depending on the context that they're placed in. As long as horror and a belief in the supernatural has existed, cemeteries have been the settings of choice for all sorts of ghastly and ghoulish predicaments. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at 3 haunted cemeteries. Greenwood Cemetery, Washington State. Washington State is one of America's most stunning states. Both the Blue and Rocky Mountain ranges weave their way through Washington and are surrounded by beautiful valleys out towards the Pacific coast. Given the state's scenic nature, you'd be forgiven for assuming that this beauty would also be reflected in places which incorporated nature into their design, such as cemeteries, national parks, and zoos. And on the face of it, this is true for Greenwood Cemetery, officially Greenwood Memorial Terrace, located in Spokane, US. The cemetery itself is set openly on 2 sides of a fairly main road. It's littered with tall evergreens, which conceal a large portion of the cemetery once the road twists away from the main site. As idyllic as it may look, however, Greenwood Cemetery hides a sinister story in its park-like grounds. The Greenwood Staircase is noted as one of Spokane's haunted sites. When created in the late 1800s, the cemetery was initially meant to be a large garden modelled upon the European garden cemeteries of the Victorian era. Naturally, this meant that fancy landscaping was aplenty in the garden, which exists to this day. It is thought that the original entrance to the garden, which saw its first burial on July 1, 1888, was a large staircase with a mausoleum at the top. However, over the years, alternative entrances were created, and the stairs were slowly left to rot alongside the mausoleum. Despite renovation works, the stairs are hardly used today, and perhaps that's for the best given some of the stories that they have originated. This ancient staircase is thought to be haunted in a few different ways. Legend has it that if you climb the stairs, through the overgrowth and brambles, you'll be accompanied by the voices of the deceased from the cemetery. As you attempt to reach the top, the deceased will rise from the grave and meet you on the staircase. In a devilish attempt to stop you from reaching the top, they'll overcome you with haunting feelings, poltergeist behaviour, and 1 or 2 seriously big scares. The staircase has been dubbed as having the effect of climbing 1,000 steps, as those who climb it will allegedly never reach the top, either turned back by the paranoia and fear created by the ghouls, or perhaps due to something more sinister. Thought to have been used for dark satanic rituals throughout history, those who have for some reason climbed the stairs in the night have allegedly experienced this paranormal activity. But if you do manage to make it to the top of the stairs, you are rewarded with a breathtaking view of Spokane County in all its beauty. The Haunted Resurrection Cemetery. A city cemetery, Resurrection Cemetery, in southwest Chicago, Illinois, is bordered by ordinary suburban housing, some forestry in the north of the cemetery, and beyond that, mostly warehouses. Resurrection isn't the most spectacular cemetery that you'll ever lay your eyes upon, and its flat, non-protruding landscape is a testament to this. However, the events and legends surrounding Resurrection Cemetery are not so plain. The legend for which the cemetery is famous for is that of the Resurrection Mary. A variation of vanishing hitchhiker folklore, the legend of the Resurrection Mary is one that wouldn't look out of place in Hollywood. It developed in the 30s, a time of growth and repair, yet also poverty and angst in America, and plays on very American horror ideals. Yet, for some, the Resurrection Mary is as real as ghost stories get. But who or what actually is the Resurrection Mary? The tale originates from a leisurely ballroom dance that took place one evening in 1934 at O. Henry Ballroom on Archer Avenue, the same road that Resurrection Cemetery is situated on. 20-year-old Mary Bregovi had been dancing with her boyfriend deep into the evening, as was common in the 30s. However, as can sometimes happen, the evening turned sour. At some point during the ordeal, Mary and her boyfriend got into a row and she stormed out of the ballroom. Upset, confused, and most definitely not in a state of complete mental clarity at that point, Mary fatefully stepped out into the road where she was hit by a car, which resulted in her passing away. Mary was buried in the adjacent Resurrection Cemetery in her favourite white gown, and that was thought to be the sorry end to a tragic event. In 1939, a man named Jerry Pallas stopped to pick up a young female hitchhiker by the gates of Resurrection Cemetery. He noted that she was strangely quiet, but very attractive and wearing a pretty white dress. Jerry then asked the girl to dance with him at the ballroom on the same road. Once the evening was over, Jerry offered to drive the girl home. She lived on the other side of town, but they had only driven a few hundred feet down the road when she asked him to stop the car. She got out at the cemetery, thanked Jerry for the ride, and then simply vanished. Perplexed and worried about the girl, Jerry drove onto the address that the girl had originally given him to drop her off at. There, he spoke with the girl's mother and explained the events of that evening. But more than anything, the mother seemed confused, and then she said to Jerry, "My daughter passed away 5 years ago." Some years later, Jerry spoke out about the bizarre events of that evening, saying, "It was then that I understood why the woman I was dancing with that night was ice cold to the touch. I had worked in a funeral home for a while, and it was the touch of a corpse." It was some years later until the next story of the ghostly girl in white made the news. Throughout the 80s, police officers, tourists, and locals all spoke of strange experiences they had had on Archer Avenue by the cemetery gates late at night. As a matter of fact, many of the stories of Resurrection Mary came from level-headed, rational men with no previous history of mental illness. That only makes it all the more creepier. The Howard Street Cemetery Haunting. The Howard Street Cemetery is located in Salem, Massachusetts. Howard Street forms a T-junction with Brown Street, where the Salem Witch Museum is situated, so in terms of setting, the cemetery already is a spooky one. Set amongst period Gothic Salem architecture, the cemetery lies ominously on an open, flat piece of land that is extremely atmospheric under the typical rainy grey skies that often grace Massachusetts. Sparse trees line the outside of the cemetery, and the land itself is raised a little from the road, putting Howard Cemetery on a sort of ghostly plinth. Arranged in broken rows, many of the graves in Howard Cemetery date back to the early 18th century. Amongst them are Revolutionary War heroes and sailors, but unfortunately no witches lie in the ground of the cemetery. Or at least, this has never been verified. The site is thought to have been the location of the execution of Giles Corey, a Salem farmer who famously refused to plead neither guilty nor not guilty when charged with being a witch in 1692. Corey was left for days under the crushing weight of the rocks piled on his back and passed away. His remains lie buried in the soil of what is now the Howard Street Cemetery. Throughout the 1500s and 1600s, witch crazes and witch hunts were occurring all over the world. But although we know today that those accused of witchcraft were most definitely not witches, Giles Corey's story goes slightly against the norm. He allegedly placed a curse on the sheriff of Salem and all who came after him, and a few years later, the sheriff suddenly passed away of a heart attack. Although that could just be a coincidence. However, strangely enough, over the years, a number of Salem sheriffs have been forced into retirement and/or suffered several health issues, often to do with the heart. It is widely noted that doctors haven't been able to work out why these sheriffs have suffered these specific problems, almost as if they are the work of the supernatural. The cemetery is known to be particularly haunting at night, with several dim oil lamps casting pale rays of light over the dark gravestones. After all, who really knows what the nighttime hides in Howard Cemetery? But what do you make of these haunted cemeteries? Who knows the extent of the secrets that these graveyards really hold? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us by growing this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.